let's have a quick look at our study schedules and check that we are on the right topic. So today, yeah, we're a little bit behind, but we'll have a time to catch up in the, so we'll be able to combine. So basically we've already sort of started the assessment 1. So we'll be able to combine. Yeah, we'll catch up by the term break anyway. All right, so not a big deal, but today we're looking at building and configuring the desktop pools, okay? So this is the biggest, the major step today, okay? Because the last couple of lessons and the previous classes, we've been just building. And today we're gonna actually do something that by the end of the worksheet, you should be able to user log in to the browser web client, and it will generate a virtual machine that's from your image from last week, and then you'll be able to connect to it and use it. I know the performance is going to be very bad. Okay, you got to understand that. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so that's the only thing. That's always been a problem with our class here. And in the future, I might, because it's a small class at the diploma level, I'm thinking about how we can spread the load. So instead of having, like, you know, for example, in here we've got 20 machines, right? Wouldn't it be good if we can put a vCenter on one, ESXi on another one, and so forth and so forth, okay? So, but obviously that means we have to use the bridge network, the physical network, and then that's got complications as well. But obviously if the performance is so bad, we might have to do something like that. But right now it's all in the same physical machine. Yeah, it's still doable, but you'll realize today at the last part, it's going to be very, very slow. Okay, just mentally prepare yourself for it. Okay, like not so much like for example, when your user logs into the virtual desktop, right? It's going to be so slow. But the good, I guess the good thing, or the bad thing, or the good thing is we don't have to use that desktop too much. It's just there so we can see you get a desktop, you can use it, and that's about it, okay? But obviously in real life, when we have physical, better servers and all that kind of stuff, it will work a lot better than what we have now. So don't forget, these systems are meant to run on enterprise physical servers, okay? With multiple hosts. And obviously, if we look at the server grade machines, they're going to have like loads and loads of memory and loads of CPU per physical machine. So we're trying to put it all on a single desktop level hardware. So that's why it's so bad. Okay. So, but I don't want it to influence your opinion to say that, hey, this virtual desktop business is terrible. Why do we want to use this? Because we're not doing it the proper way from a resource point of view. Okay. So let's get into what we have to do today. So if we're going to the next topic, which is build and configure the desktop pools, and we will start with the PowerPoint, but I'll have the worksheet open as well so that we can refer to it and talk about it, because obviously, yeah, the PowerPoint is meant to talk about the worksheet, and obviously something like this, I cannot do demonstrations because it's almost impossible to demonstrate something that takes so long, okay? But I'll have the worksheet open as well. And the good thing for you today, Roman, is you don't need to download any more new files. Next time, yes. This time, no. So, all right, let's get into the presentation. So let me see if I can, if this presents well. No, let's swap the presenter machine. Okay, so today we're going to configure the desktop pools. So today we're going to try to bring it all together. Last few weeks, we've been creating and building the environment. First of all, we built the virtual desktop infrastructure with the vCenter, the ESXi, and a domain controller. Okay, so that's sort of where we left off from the other subject. And obviously the true NAS shared storage. The next after that, we built the connection server, which is the critical infrastructure that's for the desktop virtualization part. And then I think last week we built the virtual desktop image that we're going to use as our basis of our deployment. But today we're going to actually create what's called the desktop pools. Okay, and this is the pool of desktops that the users can connect to. And today we're going to bring it all together. We're going to understand what desktop pools are. We're going to understand the different types of desktop pools. We're going to assign users to desktop pools with what's called entitlements. And we want to understand the difference between instant and full clones, and understand desktop pool end user entitlements, as well as managing the desktop pools. Some tasks that's involved in managing desktop pools. So first of all, what is a desktop pool? Basically, a Horizon desktop pool is a group of virtual desktop machines with identical configurations. Remember, it was based on that image. They're all going to be identical. The group itself is referred to as a desktop pool. Okay, all machines in the desktop pool share the same settings, and they have uniform configuration, with each having the same operating system version, the applications, the CPU, and memory specifications. Okay. We can customize the hardware, e.g. pools can be configured, include machines that with a specific hardware, like a physical GPU card in the host server, if that's required. Like for example, these days, if your user is needing to work with what's a big data, machine learning, or AI, obviously they would need specialized machines than someone who's working on a call center and who's needing just to use the basic apps and the browser and internet connection. So what we can do with these desktop pools is we can create a pool for each use case. Okay, so for example, we've created that image. Now we can create a desktop pool in our worksheet. Our example will be a sales department. Okay, then we're going to deploy these desktop pools for the sales department. But if another department needs a slightly different pool with different configurations, then we can have other images, we can have other specifications, and we can tailor the hardware based on the requirements of the pool. Pools can be created for specific departments, each with a different configuration to match their unique requirements. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here. Horizon desktop pools provide flexible and uniform virtual desktop configurations tailored to meet the specific needs of different departments or their use cases within the organization. So in the worksheet, we're going to just stick with one department, obviously, as our example. And we're going to stick with one desktop pool, one type of desktop pool, which is the most appropriate for most situations, which is that instant clone, which is a floating pool, which is basically means that it gets deployed when someone logs in, and it gets deleted when they finish and they log out. So there's different types of desktop pools. There's obviously automated desktop pools, and automated desktop pools are what is the benefits. Okay, if you had to do something manually, then there's really not good benefits, but you definitely can. For example, you know that, hey, this one user needs these special requirements. That's not only just for that one user. So maybe I can just go and manually create a desktop virtual machine for that person and just deploy it manually, and then get him to connect to it, right? Easy. And we can actually make sure that he is or she is entitled to that one desktop machine or pool. And then every time he logs in through the Horizon client, whether that be the web browser or the Horizon client software, he's always going to connect to that specific one. So, but we're going to discuss automated desktop pools because that's where the benefit is. Okay, the benefit is that you can create one image, one desktop pool configuration, and then when your users log in, they just generate these clones, and they have their own desktop that they connect to. Okay, so that's the benefit. Where those manual ones, you can, it's possible, and it's probably appropriate in certain situations, but it's not a huge benefit to the individual, to your organization, to do that all the time for everyone. So with automated desktop pools, the creation process is to automatically create from a snapshot or a template of a virtual desktop gold image, which is what we created last week. The deployment options is that you can be on demand or pre-built. What does that mean? On demand means the virtual desktops are created when someone needs it. Okay, because obviously, if they are already all sitting there, like if I have 100 users and 100 desktops are all turned on already, that's a big waste of resources, right? Because it doesn't mean all 100 people are logged in at the exact same time. So that's why on demand is preferable, because it only generates a new clone, generates a desktop when someone needs it. There's also the other way, which is a pre-built, which desktops are already available for users up front. We can configure that during our configuration. But again, like I said, that's a bit of a waste of resource, because it means if I need 5 or 6 or 10 or 100, they're already running at the same time, whether people are logged in or not. So advantages of automated pools is there's flexibility and ease of management. It simplifies your administration. You'll see that when we finish the last couple of steps, we'll be logging in with a user, and a new desktop is generated. They can go in and they can use it. Not much to do after that. If you have correct infrastructure, and if you have 100 users all with the same requirements, then each one can do that and generate their own virtual desktop. It's good for dynamic environments, so it enables features like instant clones for rapid deployment. That's what we're going to do. We're going to do an instant clone. So we also said that besides the automated process, you can do a manual desktop pool. Desktop pool containing pre-built machines, either physical or virtual. You can do this through managing through vCenter, but it's not created with instant clone or full clones. It's created basically manually. Requirements. The virtual machines must run the Horizon agent to deliver the end user by to the connection server. So even if we're doing manually, we still have to install that agent software, if you remember from your previous worksheet. Okay, the reason why we had that agent software is that so that they can log into the Horizon client and connect to the right desktop virtual machine. Okay, so basically manual desktop pools are suitable for niche scenarios. Niche meaning specific, very, very specialized scenarios with specific needs. E.g., an end user needs to access a rack-mounted workstation with advanced display protocol requirements. Like, for example, like I said, if you have a developer who's working with machine learning, AI, that requires dedicated GPU. So maybe you can create this virtual machine only for him with a dedicated GPU for the hardware specific rack-mounted workstation. Okay? But there's a higher management overhead, meaning that if you did this for everyone, you wouldn't be able to. Okay? Because first of all, it's almost as bad as deploying each physical computer, isn't it? It lacks the flexibility or automated desktop pools, because basically they are locked into that computer, that virtual desktop. Okay, and obviously if something goes wrong with that virtual desktop, you have to either restore from a snapshot, backup, or recreate it manually again. Whereas a desktop pool, with the automated desktop pool, if something goes wrong, you just log out, log in, get a new desktop instant clone. Okay, RDS desktop pools, so remote desktop service. So what's this? This basically allows you, what this means is, I think we talked about it before, instead of having virtual machines, we can have service, Microsoft service. And RDS is a remote desktop service. So it's not the remote desktop that you're used to where you're doing for remote management, because that's really only allowing 1 or 2 users. Remote desktop service basically turns your server 2019, 22, whatever, into a sort of a host where each one's connecting with a different session. They're not using a different operating system, they're using the same operating system, but you're connecting with a different session. So you're interacting with the same operating systems, the same drives, the same storage, the same everything, but you have a different session of it. I can't really explain it without using the remote desktop, but it just allows multiple people to connect to the server and use a desktop. So this remote desktop service desktop pool requires the remote desktop server farm. What does that mean? That means you need a whole group of server 2019s, 22s to be this farm where people connect to for sessions. But it allows for IT administrators to create a desktop pool for delivering session-based desktop or publish applications. We're not going to worry about that. That's not really what we're here to learn, okay? Because that's really leveraging the Microsoft servers and the Horizon agent to sort of connect you with these with these remote desktop sessions. What we're here to do is to launch a new virtual machine in our vCenter infrastructure and connect the users to it. That's what we want to do. There's desktop pool user assignments. There's two types of desktop pool end user assignments. There's what's called floating and there's what's called dedicated. Okay, floating means it floats, anyone can use it. Dedicated means it's dedicated to someone, right? So floating is non-persistent. What does that mean? It means that when you log on, you create a new one. When you log off, deletes. When you log on again, you create a new one from scratch. But it's very quick, okay? So whatever you do, like if you actually put something on the local C drive, it will disappear, okay? Obviously, you're probably thinking, what if I'm creating all this work? What if I'm saving my work to my documents and all that kind of stuff? Well, you have to either train your users to save to a network drive, or you have to do what's called folder redirecting for group policies, which is what we're going to look at in the future for group policies. And you have to sort of get the users to actually store their persistent data in a location that's persistent rather than these non-persistent or temporary floating. OneDrive, yeah, you can have OneDrive syncing, definitely. You could have the redirection to the My Documents to OneDrive like we do, or redirection from My Documents to the network server if you want, or you can have just mapped drives at a minimum. We all know about map drives, and instead of saving to your My Documents, you save to the network location. So that's what it's all about. With floating desktops, floating assignments, sorry, personalization requires VMware DEM, okay, Dynamic Environment Manager, for user profiles and personalization. So really, you get a default look and feel about the thing, which is fine for most cases. Like, for example, we're talking about people who are working in the call center. Do they need a really personalized desktop? Not really. All they need is an operating system with all the apps they need and all the internet connections so they can actually interact with callers, right? So really, personalization is only really for situations where they, users are doing more than just those basic tasks. Really, does anyone really need personalization on their corporate computer? Not really, right? Not as a part of their job requirement, to be honest. Sorry, I can see there's a typo there, but I'll fix that up anyway in a second. But there's no spaces. Okay, applications are delivered on demand using VM app volumes tailored for each user. So we're going to learn about that in the future. And basically what this means is that these apps are not installed on these non-persistent computers. We're going to put them on an app volume, and basically we're going to attach these app volume in the future into the virtual machines as required. Okay. So with the dedicated assignments, they're persistent, okay? Meaning it's a user gets this computer. It's dedicated for that user, that computer. It's linked. So a user connects to the same desktop every time they log in. Each user owns their desktop virtual machine. Flexibility, application can still be delivered dynamically with profile managed independently. But this dedicated persistent assignments are not what we generally want to use. Okay, we don't want to generally use this because that just, again, it's going to cause anything that's going to cause complications or inefficiencies is what we don't want to really see. Okay, so if you think about it, that if I have a dedicated, that means if I have 100 users, I need to have 100 different workstations, don't I? Always stored somewhere, always ready to go. So therefore, that's inefficient. So I think the floating one is most appropriate for this virtual desktop infrastructure. Because again, if you need a dedicated desktop, then you probably could be, you probably could justify having a physical desktop. Okay, when we have a physical desktop, of course, it's all dedicated to us. We can take it everywhere we go, right? But the issue is when we want to talk about virtual desktop infrastructure, it's all about the efficiencies, the elimination of the physical desktop or physical laptop. So that's why. Yep, go for it. Yeah.
So does it mean that, for example, we have a desktop?
Yeah.
For the desktop, and the user needs to use some, I don't know, Microsoft.
Whatever. Yeah. Let's just keep it simple. Let's say they need to use Brave browser. Okay, and that's only for this user. So we can create what's called VMware app volumes and attach it to this desktop for that user. So first of all, it's like, remember we talked about how it's like combining lots of things together. First of all, we have the user assignments for what desktop they get. Then we have user assignments for what applications they get. And then when they get the desktop, they attach the right applications, and then they have those applications able to be executed from the app volume to that desktop.
So, how are those applications installed?
Yes. So basically, we're going to cover that in the future. So if we look at our the downloads, you'll see that a lot of these questions will be answered in the future, because obviously, if we're going to talk about Horizon apps and all that kind of stuff, then that's something that's going to come up. Okay. So it might be just too early to talk about it and to sort of, because obviously when we talk about it, it will make more sense. Because right now, if we worry too much about what's going in the future, it's just like if we in week 1 we worry about all these other things, it's we're too focused on something that's not important right now. Okay, so yeah. Yeah.
So what user experience? So I know that we can use a browser to access the desktop.
Yep.
But it doesn't feel like the full user desktop experience.
It's basically like a remote desktop. Okay, it's effectively remote desktop. Okay. In fact, one of the settings we're going to talk about later is what is the connection protocol. So it's going to be like a remote desktop. It's going to be within a window. Okay, that's inside another device, and that device could be your phone, your iPad, what's a thin client, or even another computer. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So it's not going to be a full desktop experience. It's never going to be like that. Okay, it's not going to install the operating system on your physical machine. It's never going to be like that. So that's what. Yeah, it's like more like your VMware window. All right, it's never going to be a desktop experience. So don't ever think it's going to replace your full desktop experience. It's going to be access to a desktop through a window. Whether that window is in an app or window that's in a browser, it's a window. Okay, it's never going to be the physical desktop. Okay, so just get that out of your mind straight away. All right, so first of all, there's a vSphere, not vSphere client, vSphere VMware Horizon client. That's a bit of software we install in the future. We're going to install it on our desktop machine, and when we double click on that application, we'll have log in, obviously. We'll have all the different desktop pools we can use, and then when we click that, it will open up in a window, but that's still in a window. You're never going to get the full desktop experience, okay? So you got to understand that much. It's always going to be on a window on an end device. It's never going to be like as if it's a desktop like I'm using now. Okay, but that's the thing. That remember we talked about the benefits of virtual desktop is that they are running on your server infrastructure. They are located physically inside your domain, inside your LAN, but you are accessing it from possibly anywhere. And you are able to use the apps from anywhere. And once you get used to the fact that it's in a window, it's just like when you're using your VMware window. It's not too different, is it? Okay, so but don't ever think it's going to be you boot up your computer, it's going to go straight into that. No, it's not going to do that. Okay, so your device, your end device, still has to have wherever it's using to get that initial connection up. Okay, so let's keep on going though. So with the virtual desktop creation options, we can create instant clones, full clones, and in the past, link clones. Okay, link clones is no longer available. It's been deprecated, as in it's not used anymore. But instant clones is what we're going to use because instant clones quickly creates a virtual desktop with minimal storage overheads. Okay, so what does that mean? That means we don't store, it's, yeah, instant clones is like a link clone in a lot of ways. It's always linking back to the parent, but it's got minimum storage overheads, meaning we don't have to store the whole OS. If it's a 20 gig OS and all that kind of stuff, we don't have to store that straight away. We just store whatever we create or wherever we generate, whatever temporary files we generate. This is preferred for ease of management and low storage impact. Like I said, again, that perfect example is that call center where everyone needs the same interface and they are doing basic functions. Then they don't need a full clone. They just need an instant clone, and then it's deployed. It doesn't use too much. It doesn't need to use much storage at all. Instant clones can be both a floating or dedicated desktop. So that's independent of whether it's instant clone or full clone. Full clones are created a full replica of the desktop virtual machine, which is the gold image. It requires a significantly more storage. Well, that's a bit like our idea of link clones and full clones, isn't it? It's only suitable when specific use case requires full clones again. Why do you need a full clone in the first place? It's only suitable if there's a situation where you need a full clone. Okay, so instant clone is preferred. So there's some key requirements. So these are some of the things we must have already. And obviously we need the Horizon server and all that kind of stuff that we talked about that in the past. But beyond that, we need obviously our gold image virtual machine. And something that we forgot to do, I forgot to tell you to do, should I say, is to change the IP addressing back to DHCP. Remember, we just did a static IP address last time, but we need to put it back to DHCP because that's what our clones want to be, right? And obviously, we need to have a snapshot of our gold image. We also need a DHCP server, so that's the funny thing, isn't it? So if we're generating all these clients, they need to get an IP address from someone. We need a DHCP server, which is going to be authorized for the domain, and very important, it needs to have DNS suffix information because part of the part of the instant clones or the virtual desktop is that they have to join the domain. Okay, remember what I've been saying throughout your cert4 and stuff like that, no DNS, no Active Directory. So therefore this DNS is very important so that they know who is the domain controller and access all the service records that's part of the Active Directory integrated DNS. And obviously IP address allocations. On the vCenter, I know we've got the vCenter, we've got the ESXi, we've got the shared storage. What else? We need more than that though, okay? So first of all, we need what's called a resource pool. Remember we're doing resource pools before? It's a way of allocating resources of the vCenter or the virtualization environment. It needs a cluster. So we need a cluster with vMotion and DRS enabled. And obviously this means that it will automatically move the virtual machines to wherever host it's available and it's got capacity. And this is not necessarily required, but it's good. We need a folder in the vCenter for the virtual machines that you're going to generate. Because remember, when in our vCenter, we got a list of all the virtual machines. You've got some servers, some actual virtual machines that's required, but then you're going to create a whole bunch with this virtual desktop environment. So if you create all these virtual machines, which is going to be created as your users log in, if you put it all in the same place, it's just messy, isn't it? It would be better if it was organized in a different folder. And that's what the folder really is about. Okay, it's for organization. So keep it clean, keep it easy, so that you know that every virtual machine in here is for the for the desktops. Okay, and obviously we need a network that the virtual machines need to be connect to, and that network needs to be accessible to the Active Directory. Okay, that's very important. And obviously with the Active Directory, we need to have an OU for all the full clones or instant clones virtual machines, because when they go through the process of provisioning, they will be generated. And when they're generated, part of the whole process is that they are added to Active Directory. And when we add it to Active Directory, we then will automatically put them into a specific OU. So again, for organization. Okay, so you know what physical machines, what virtual machines, and obviously we can then use in the future group policies to actually configure these virtual desktops or the users. Okay, and obviously we need users and groups. Okay, we need users and groups because it's all about users, isn't it? It's all about the end users connecting to the virtual machines. If we don't have any end users, what's the point of the virtual machine? So we need users, and we'll need some groups. So in our worksheet, we're going to create, there's already some users there. We're going to just rename it to be sales, so that it becomes a sort of a scenario where it's a sales department. Okay, and we're going to create a global group called GG group, sales users, and then we're going to configure the entitlements to allocate those GG group users, GG sales users group, to be able to access the desktop pool that we're creating. Oops, let's keep on going. So here are some important settings, okay? So first of all, enable provisioning. Basically, if you don't tick this, it won't be made, okay? Allows virtual desktop machines to be made, basically provisioned. Stop provisioning on error. So basically, stop provisioning means stop making these clones if there's error, if there's a problem. Naming patterns. So remember, when we create these virtual machines, they're all going to get a different name, aren't they? If they all get a name, do we care what the name is? Yes, we do, to be honest. Because what if we had so many different desktop pools? And obviously, how do we make sure that each name is different? So you'll see that there's what's called a naming pattern. So if I put this ICF, this curly bracket N in here, then the desktop, the curly bracket means number. So basically, every time a new one's created, it will go number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and so forth. So machines on demand, like we talked about, virtual machines to be provisioned on demand for efficiency. There's also this what's called the minimum number of machines, maximum number of machines, and spare machines. That's sort of important because obviously we don't want to generate the clones and have the user wait. Okay, so what we're saying is the minimum number of machines is 1, possibly. Okay, we want to keep 1 alive, which is fine. And then when a user logs in, they'll use up that 1 machine, right? But then we can also configure what's the maximum number of machines. Obviously, it depends on your resources and your capacity. Obviously, if we have great capacity and we can accommodate many hundreds, and we got many hundreds of users, then we can put this maximum to specify a max. Obviously, we don't want, even if we have capacity for hundreds, what if someone, they keep on launching it and you get thousands, then you can't cope anyway, right? So this max stops your systems or your infrastructure from being overwhelmed because it doesn't have capacity for it. So that's an upper limit. The spare virtual machines, again, for the same reason as we talked about before with the minimum numbers, is that when you have these spare virtual machines which are powered on, that means one's about, if we say spare is equal to 1, that means we have 1 virtual machine ready to go at any one time. So anyone logs in, they use it. But then another spare is created. And someone logs in and they use it. And another spare is created up to the maximum number of virtual machines. you see how now for every person who logs in, assuming they don't all log in at the same time, they're always going to have that spare. So we can configure the spare machines however many numbers we want. Let's say we've got capacity for 1,000 desktops, but in the sales department we've got 100 users. Maybe we're going to set the minimum number of the users as 20, and we're going to have the spare of 10. So therefore, the first 20 people that log in, they'll use up those the machines already, and then we're going to generate another 10 clones, so that's ready for the next 10 people, okay, and so forth. So you can see how that will make it faster for the users when they log in to access the virtual machine straight away because they're already running. There's some vCenter settings as well. So we need a default image. Obviously, we're going to use the image that we created last week. And we need a snapshot of that image, which is what we created last week as well, but we'll create one this week as well. The VM folder, remember we specified the VM folder that's in the vCenter, where we want to keep these virtual machines in the area. So that's the folder we tell it to go to. The cluster, so we tell it which cluster to use, which means it will use the resources out of that cluster to run the virtual machines. The resource pool, basically we want to control what resources the virtual machines use because it might impact on other virtual machines. So therefore, we will actually tell it to use a resource pool, and that resource pool may have limits as far as how much resources it can access. For us, for our purposes, for our worksheet, we're going to make it unlimited. We just need the fact that we just need a resource pool, really. And obviously the data store, okay, where we're going to store the virtual machines. So obviously we're going to use that TrueNAS as our data store. If you remember, that was the shared storage. It needs to be shared storage so that we can use DRS, vMotion very quickly to move virtual machines around. And also, ideally, you should have multiple data stores. Ideally, your data store should be different for the replica and the OS disks. So if you're creating instant clone, and obviously you got your original, you got your new clones, they shouldn't be in the same data store because they might be, remember, reading the original files from the instant clones because they're still linked. So they should be on separate data stores, but that's ideal situations. Our situation is not ideal. So our situation, we're going to just put it on the same data store. So it will still work, but it's, like I said, our resources, our hardware resources are not ideal. The network is where you specify which network the clones are connecting to. And obviously, it can be set to the same as what the golden master or golden image is a VM is connected to. And that's what we'll use. Okay, so remember we talked about the display protocols just before. So when we go configure these things, there's a default display protocol. It is what is basically used by default. It can be VMware Blast. It could be Microsoft Remote Desktop Protocol. It could be PC over IP. It could be any of these protocols. And the ones you choose which one you want to use as default, but we could also allow the users to choose themselves. So you can set this as default, but then the user can choose one of the three anyway. And you allow users to choose just in case they're on a network where one protocol is allowed and another protocol is not allowed, so they can connect with whichever one they want to use. There's a setting which allows session collaboration. And this one, so it's session collaboration. And this one's actually not important, it's useful. We're not going to use it, but by the way, we're not going to use it, but it only works with VMware Blast protocol, which is this one. We're going to use Microsoft Remote Desktop. Okay, we're familiar with that, hopefully. This one, allow collaboration, only works with VMware Blast protocol, but it allows the administrator to shadow the user's session. What does that mean? You can see what they're doing. And it's good for troubleshooting. And that's what it's good for. There's also guest customization settings. So obviously we can specify the domain that the generated clones will join after deployment. We can even specify the container, which container in Active Directory to place the virtual machine objects, the Active Directory machine objects once they join the domain. And there's this clone prep, which is very similar to what we know of sysprep. So clone prep is used to customize the instant clone virtual desktop machines as they are created to ensure that desktops are also joined the AD. new virtual desktop machines will also have the same SID as the golden image and application as have the same GUID, so they're part of the same thing. So we need this clone prep to make sure that they can join the domain. Because as we know, when we make clones, they have exactly the same SID and GUID. There's also a chance to run any scripts. So obviously, if we can have some power off or post synchronization scripts that we can create to customize it even further. Obviously, we're going to keep it simple today, and we're not going to incorporate any scripts yet. We're going to make it more complicated in the future, but we're going to keep it simple today. There's the desktop end user entitlements. This is where you associate the user with the desktop pool that they can use. So when an end user connects via the Horizon client, which is that software we talked about, or with the browser, they see an icon representing desktop pools they can have access to. Once they click on it, then they will be connected to the right virtual machine. The entitlements can be based on user accounts or group accounts. We can specify these users or groups from the Active Directory groups or user accounts. And we can specify the desktop pool that these users have entitlements for. Sometimes they can have entitlements for multiple pools. But in our case, we're going to have just one pool they can click on. Some additional tasks. Okay, once we've created all these things, we can manage desktop pools by actually deleting them, changing them, editing them. We can add more desktop pools. We can edit existing desktop pools. We can duplicate desktop pools, copy it. But maybe we've got one for sales now. Maybe we want to create another one for let's say, Office admin. And we can duplicate these desktop pools but change certain settings afterwards. Obviously, if we don't need a desktop pool anymore, we can delete these settings and we can add and remove entitlements as we see fit, and as well as updating the clone desktop pool image. Remember we talked about it before, that there's no point turning on Microsoft updates because of the fact that these pools will always deploy from a image, and it always will be out of date. So from time to time, you have to update the clone image yourself as the administrator of the VDI, virtual desktop interface infrastructure, shall I say. All right, so that's the end of the PowerPoint today. So what we'll talk about is the worksheet now. It says 90 to 120 minutes, depends. It all depends, okay, Robin? So we all know that it depends on your hardware. We still got the same situation. And the first thing is we need to have the virtual machines. The next thing, Roman, is we need to have some extra network cards on our ESXis. All right, so we've done that before, hopefully. Then you'll see that you're going to have extra host-only one and a VMNIC one on each of the ESXi 1 and 2. Here's some instructions on how to add it. So we're adding hardware, we're adding a network card, and the first one is going to be host-only. The second one is going to be VMNet 2, okay, to each one. And we're going to repeat the process for ESXi2. Then we're going to power on these virtual machines in this order, same as last time. But we're going to turn off the DHCP service on the VMNet 1. Remember, we need a DHCP server, so we need to make sure that the DHCP server is turned off here. We could have used it, but to be honest, that's not very realistic. So it's better if we use our DHCP server. So as part of that, then we configure the domain controller as a DHCP server, and we're going to name these things. I haven't given you any instructions, but to be honest, we expect you to know how to do this. Okay, if you do really get stuck, I definitely can help you with this. But the key thing is to make sure you activate and authorize the scope. You know, if you remember, until you activate and authorize the scope's not working. Okay, so that's probably a key step, I would say, that if you might have forgotten if you haven't done it for a while. And the next thing is we need to configure the Active Directory. So remember, we said that we have some users already, but unfortunately it's called this from the previous subjects, but we're going to rename it to sales to sort of make it look like it's a sales department that we're going to create these. We're going to delete all the global groups that's there. We're going to create a new global group. and then we're going to add all these users as a member of the GG sales users. Okay, it's just so we can set up a scenario that we can represent something that we might do in real life. So then on vCenter, we're going to create a new cluster. Okay, and on this cluster, we're going to turn on DRS, which also turns on vMotion. And that's pretty simple. Then we're going to add the hosts. So ESXi 1 and 2 are both added. And that's that. And then we're going to configure the cluster. We're going to have 2 switches. We're going to have one which is called, they're both distributed switches. One of them is going to be called D-switch prod for the production network, which is going to be the host only. Another one, which is the distributed switch, D-switch vMotion, which is going to be the VMnet 2. And then we're going to specify the third and fourth one. Remember, we added first and second. So you got to understand that if you added it in the wrong order, okay? So if you added the host only second and VMnet first, then you have to switch it around, right? So you got to understand that, okay? So assuming you followed the instructions, you added the host only first, then it's going to be VNIC 3, okay? And the other one's going to be VNIC 4. Then we configure an IP address for vMotion like that. Okay, remember vMotion? That's a live migration of the virtual machines. And then we finish, but then I noticed for mine that the iSCSI ports interfaces disappeared. Not sure if it's going to be everyone, but just in case, basically you just have to go check that you've still got the vSwitch 1, and you just have to add to the virtual switch, and you add these extra iSCSI adapters, just like we did in the previous one. And then afterwards, you do the NIC teaming. Then afterwards, we rescan storage, and we should see that we've got the TrueNAS shared storage again. Okay, so that's something to look out for. Not saying it's going to happen to everyone, but I noticed that that's what happened for mine straight away for some reason. I'm not 100% sure if it's just a bug for mine or if it's going to be for everyone. So that's something that I didn't have time to work out. So I put some instructions there, but they're the same as before. You don't need to create a new switch. You just have to use the vSwitch 1. That's already there, okay? Key point, all right? Remember this? Okay, vSwitch 1. So I might say, yeah, existing switch, ensure vSwitch 1 is selected, okay? All right, so then we need to create a resource pool. So the instructions are right-click, new resource pool. We're going to call it sales VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure, and we're going to make sure it's all high shares because we don't want any limitations on our resources. And then we're going to create, so then we're going to go here and we're going to create a new folder for virtual machines and templates. This is where we're going to store the virtual machine, virtual desktop machines. Then we're going to go to our golden master, gold image, and we're going to power it on. So turn it on, we're going to log in and we're going to change it to that, okay? And then we're going to take a new snapshot and we're going to call it gold image v2. Okay, so that's something I forgot from last worksheet. So, but because we forgot, we had to do it now, okay? So now I'm going to create the instant clone floating pool, and we go to the Horizon server using that URL. Okay, you might have to accept a self-signed certificate like we normally know. Then we log in with the administrator password 1, which is the domain administrator. Then from here, we're going to go to desktops under inventory, and we're going to click add, and then we're going to add an automated desktop pool. It's an instant clone. It's a floating. It's not going to use a virtual SAN. It's going to be called these things, and that's what it is. And then it's going to have the naming that we discussed before. And then we are going to specify the golden image. Yeah, so next to golden image in vCenter, And then we're going to say use that Windows 10 Gold image. We're going to specify which snapshot. We're going to tell it to use that V2 snapshot that we just created. And then we're going to say which folder location. We're going to use that sales VDI, sales VD location. Which cluster, we're going to use that virtual desktop cluster that we created just before. And which resource pool, we're going to choose that resource pool. Which shared storage, and there's only one shared storage. You can see it sort of flows because there's only really those one choices, okay? So, and then this is what's happening. The key, one of the key things that we don't make a choice is the network, because we're going to just use the same network that the golden image is using, which is fine. These are the settings. Remember we said, first of all, what's this one? Oh, this one's just some default settings. We don't need to change those. And then we got this one, which is the display protocols. We're going to use the remote desktop protocol, but we're going to allow the users to change if they want to. And the 3D render, we don't really care about 3D render. We're going to use the vSphere client to do this, but really that's not important. And we're not going to turn on that collaboration because that's a waste of resources. And then we specify the container, the AD container where the virtual machines will be added. I think we specified the domain. Yeah, the domain is already there because based on our login information, the container we're going to specify, and then it's already got this clone prep selected. So it's definitely going to go for it. We don't need to do anything else. These are where you could put the scripts on. And then finally, you look at the review the whole thing, click submit, and then it will be going through the provisioning, publishing, okay? So you can then click on this link, and then you can see that it's in the state of publishing. You can see it's 2% completed, but this is where I said it could take a very long time, okay? So this, like I said, quite a while, could be 30 plus minutes, depending on resources you've been allocated to your virtual infrastructure, but eventually it will be a state. So you just click, so there's a refresh button on the top, you know, with the circle arrow. You keep on clicking that, and eventually it will be published. Okay, that's a key thing. But once it's published, in your vCenter, you'll see there's a sales virtual machine, and that's running, because remember that's a spare. And you can see that's the desktop, and then you can look at the details of it. So it's got an IP address from DHCP. It's running on ESXi1 in my case, but it could be ESXi2 because of the fact that it's in cluster, it's got that vMotion. And then we configure the entitlements. We're going to add a desktop entitlement instead of application entitlement. We'll talk about application entitlement in the future. And we're going to search for the global group, GG sales users. We're going to do it by group, because if you do it by user, that's too much work, isn't it? I'd rather work with groups and users anytime. And we're going to tell it to use that floating sales desktop pool. And then on our horizon, again, we'll go to the browser. At this point, we can install the client if we want to, which is a bit of software on your physical desktop machine, or we can just use the browser, which is what we use here. And once you log in with a user from Active Directory, so E. Evans, if you remember, it's from that thing, and then you can see what desktops you're entitled for. And in this case, it's the instant cloud floating for sales. And we double click on this, and this will run very, very slowly. So just keep that in mind. But then you'll have this window, like I said, a window for the desktop, and you will be able to use this. And if you remember, there's the app that we installed as example from last week when we had the default apps. And basically check if it's a member of the domain. Check if you ping server 1. How's the performance? It's going to be terrible, okay? But you'll see that it is a member of the domain, and you can ping server 1, and basically open the Horizon Management Console and click on the sales desktop pool. And under the desktop section, you should see 2 virtual machines now, because of the fact that here, where we saw 1 before, you see how, where is it? No, we didn't see, it's up a little bit, okay? So in the same bit of information, but up a little bit, is going to see how many virtual machines. You're going to be able to see 2, and you're going to see another spare virtual machine which is running. At this point, we'll just finish that. And at this point, oh, sorry, I moved it to the wrong screen. At this point, we'll take a snapshot and we'll finish the worksheets. But this is going to take a long time. Okay, just be aware of that. So that's what we want to try to do today. So, yep. Yeah, so in this case, I want you to pause the virtual machines instead of shutting it down, okay? All right, so that's a little bit different. So that's not a mistake, okay? All right. But it will be bigger. Obviously, you got to understand that.